On this edition of Mississippi Roads, we visit a museum outside of Hattiesburg dedicated exclusively to military history. We'll travel with a group of veterans to the World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. Step back in time to 1812 and visit the town of Washington outside of Natchez, and we'll see how some Dutch airmen left their mark on Jackson.
Support for the arts segment of Mississippi Roads comes from the Mississippi Arts Commission, whose mission is to be a catalyst for the arts and creativity in Mississippi. Information available at www.arts.ms.gov.
Mississippi Roads is made possible in part by the generous support of viewers like you. Thank you.
Down Mississippi Road. Mississippi Road.
Hi, welcome back to Mississippi Roads. I'm your host, Walt Grayson. You know, down through the ages, the United States of America has fought against tyranny and injustice wherever it existed. Countless men and women have served in our country's military since its founding as an independent nation back in 1776. And that's what brings us here today, to the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum at Camp Shelby, outside of Hattiesburg. A museum dedicated solely to the brave men and women who have served throughout the ages in all branches of our nation's military. And that's how the museum's laid out, in a sense. It starts back in the 1800s, exploring the military's role in the Mississippi Territory and beyond, all the way up to the Civil War, which students of Mississippi history are already probably pretty familiar with. But there's also the Spanish-American War of 1898, the Mexican War, the Mississippi Dragoons, and so much more to explore in just this room. But regardless of the time period, it's been the men and the women on the front lines and in service positions back behind the lines who've made all the difference in the world, protecting our freedom and honor and our very lives, to get right down to it. So when we found out about a group of World War II veterans from Mississippi traveling up to Washington, D.C. to visit the World War II Memorial, we were more than happy to pile in and go with them. It's a room full of elderly men, all waiting on an airplane. In their lives, they sold cars for a living, or repaired appliances, or ran service stations, or worked in department stores. They were carpenters, bankers, and clergymen. Pretty much extremely ordinary, as far as it goes. Some are healthy and spry, some are frail and probably shouldn't be here. Here, waiting to take another adventure in a life that, for each and every one of them, was in reality far from ordinary. They're all veterans of World War II. And here, 70 years later, they're being honored today by the Gulf Coast Honor Flight with a trip from Gulfport Airport to Washington, D.C. to see their monument, the World War II Memorial on the National Mall. Among the plumbers and electricians and shoe salesmen gathered here for this flight are people who survived Iwo Jima and the Battle of the Bulge, who made it through their 25 or 30 flights over Germany in bombers, or flew fighter planes, or climbed the Alps with rifles and field packs. Being remembered is the order of the day today, and it starts with the reception these veterans get as they land in Washington. The airport fire department begins the salutes by dousing their plane with their water cannons, an honor reserved for the highest dignitaries and heroes. Then inside, a USO band welcomes them, along with other passengers catching flights in the airport. And joining in are people who live in the Washington area who on purpose came down to greet them. Then on to the business at hand, visiting the World War II Memorial and then the other monuments in Washington. In October of 2013, the veterans from Mississippi were involved in one more beachhead. The day of their honor flight was the day the government was shut down by Washington politicians. Great shows were made that day of barricades being placed to block access to the monuments by one side, and by politicians from the other side stepping up to open the barricades and escorting the veterans through. Onlookers applauded the veterans. And the veterans had seen plenty of grandstanding in their military careers and in their return to ordinary life afterwards, not to be unduly impressed either way. But we're glad to get to see what they came to see, the monument they'd paid for with a slice of their lives, and in remembrance of their friends who paid for it with their lives. And everywhere, as other visitors realized who they were talking to, took the time to shake their hands, thank the veterans for their service.
It makes me feel very humble. In the first place, I don't really know what they're thanking me for. we did what we were asked to do. At that time, everybody in this whole nation, farmers, soldiers, businessmen, homemakers, everybody was cooperating in the war effort. And there was total unity in those years. I wish it were that way again.
There's a brotherhood among veterans. Maybe I should call it a unity because not all the veterans are men, but a kindredship. Our World War II vets visited the other war memorials on the mall. The Vietnam Wall, where names were found, and where Vietnam veterans expressed their admiration for them.
Oh, look, they're the true heroes, you know, who fought in World War II. And they have some stories, and I've enjoyed them all, so.
The haunting Korean Memorial was a stop for some of the veterans. Korea, just a few years after the end of World War II that these fellows were in, was a reminder that there never really will, in all probability, be a war that ends all wars. And on a prior trip when everything was open, they visited the Lincoln Memorial and the Marine Monument. The world's a different place today than it was 70 years ago when these veterans were involved in their other lives on the front lines or in support positions here and abroad. All together, all one against a common foe. So much has changed over the decades. I asked Marshall Bennett if he thought this was the same country he fought for back then.
In some respects, yes, and many no. It's changed greatly. A lot of it for the better, to be sure. Some of it not, probably not. But I imagine at any point in history, people living then would say that.
I don't know what all the veterans were thinking of that day. I imagine a broad spectrum of causes and effects of being involved firsthand in the war, then coming home and setting it all aside and picking up as if nothing had ever happened. Or at least that's what we thought, the ones of us who came along later and who had veterans for daddies and daddies who never let on that anything out of the ordinary had ever happened. But it had to have lived inside of them. And this day, a bunch of them got to see a small token of that out-of-sync time of their lives as it has been put into monument form in Washington. And were given the right of a lifetime to come to see it.
I've been treated with royalty, I'm telling you. They have gone overboard, and we appreciate it very, very much.
On the flight back home, the honors continued. Mail call was held, and letters solicited beforehand from family members and from school children are passed out. Thank you notes to a generation who set it all aside and made a life again when they got through with it. And then once back in Gulfport, the bands, and the cheerleaders, and it seems half the town, turned out to greet the veterans and welcome them back to Mississippi. It will be several days before these honorees will be able to mentally return to the ordinary lives they culled out for themselves after spending time in World War II. Lives well deserved for the job they did and were honored for today by the Mississippi Gulf Coast Honor Flight. In the next room, past the 1800s room, is a room dedicated to the First World War, 1914 to 1918. That war did something no other war had ever done before. It drew nearly every power in the world into it. It spawned countless revolutions and cost millions of lives. And a lot of those lives came from our soil. This room pays tribute to those battles and the way of life that many of our soldiers had to live during those years. Visitors can explore images and artifacts from the battlefield, as well as simulations of shelters and living arrangements during World War I. Throughout the exhibit, there are displays that showcase a slice of life, moments of time frozen in place for visitors to examine and ponder over. A little earlier, we toured a room that showcased a lot of events that happened back in the 1800s. And it just so happens that's when our next story takes place. Well, not really in the 1800s, it's a modern day story, but it sure looks like the 1800s when a group of folks get together just outside of Natchez to commemorate an historical event.
This is actually where Andrew Jackson camped. When he came in, he thought he was going to New Orleans. He had gotten all the militia that would follow him, brought them from Tennessee down to here, and they sat here and waited on orders to leave. The orders never came. What he got was orders to dismantle his militia and send them home. Now these were men that were local farmers and, not rich men by any means. And Andrew Jackson, as a man of honor, decided that he was not going to do that. He carried his men all the way back to Nashville on his dime. Everything that was dominant in the territory was here in Washington, and Washington was the territorial capital, so it was a thriving metropolis, even though now it's just a small community. People that were really important to the growth of the country came here. There wasn't much law enforcement at all. There was no security. And Natchez was a little rough settlement on the river at the time. Men made their own law then. We talk about outlaws. Traveling the trace was dangerous. There were a lot of people killed on the trace trying to travel. It was just the way the land was. It was raw. It had to be developed. People had to come in and build homes, cut trees, find water, dig wells. You hear about people having large families. They had large families because they could put them to work when they got old enough to work. Women still cooked over open fires. They made their own soap. They rendered their own lard. They ate what they could hunt and kill and skin. Our ancestors were amazingly industrious and imaginative. And to settle a new territory, they had a little bit of a wanderlust in them. You see us out here in costumes, and some of us will look a little fancy. The average person was not wealthy. And in that time, women were probably less than second-class citizens. So, if they had a nice dress, they saved it for teas and things like that. And of course, when they came, they brought, X amount of clothes, and they had to replenish them. A lot of times, they took over garments from the natives. If they wore their shoes out, they got a pair of moccasins. They were farmers, some of them were small merchants. They came here looking for something better. They carved a place for themselves in a land that was still wild.
This room is dedicated to World War II. In it, students and visitors to the museum can discover the elements of the war that not only defined an entire generation, but led up to the political makeup of the world as we know it down to this very day. There are displays in here dedicated to the moments of the war and the people of the war, to the momentous battles and the strategic strikes and the decisions that ultimately led to victory. Visitors touring the room can learn about the war from the strike on Pearl Harbor all the way up to Victory Day, and everything in between, including the atomic strikes on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. See scale models of some of the naval fleet that helped ensure the victory, and even view day-to-day weapons used by soldiers on both sides of the war. Plus, detailed looks inside some of the tanks, and at some of the people who made a difference. People like Vera Anderson, one of the best welders at Ingalls shipyards on the Gulf Coast. So good, in fact, that she was nationally recognized for her talents. Another group of people who made a difference in the Second World War were from another country, although they were stationed in Jackson, Mississippi. They were the Dutch Flyers, and they left quite a legacy behind. On May 10, 1940, Nazi Germany invaded Holland, driving its government into exile. The Dutch military retreated to its holdings in the South Pacific, but were forced to evacuate to Australia when the Imperial Japanese advanced against Java and the East Indies in February of 1942. Fearing yet another invasion, the Air Force of the Netherlands East Indies and the Dutch Navy began to search for a safe place to train their pilots. They chose Hawkins Field in Jackson, Mississippi.
It was in May of 1942, May the 8th. We were driving in a carpool, about 5 or 6 of us talking and having a good time. And we got to the entrance of the air base and saw these tall, good-looking guys, tan, blonde, with shorts and knee socks on.
Their uniforms were different. And of course, then young girls looked at the uniforms.
I was walking up the Capitol Street and I saw these 4 gentlemen coming down, and some of them had on shorts and some of them had on winter clothes, and I thought, gee, that's a strange looking group of boys. Where are they from?
And they looked, we just never seen anything like that before. It was interesting. I think all the conversation stopped the minute we saw that.
I was working at a little drugstore there across the street from the Y. So while I was working there, some of them would come over to have a sandwich and a Coke or something to drink.
Well, I worked after school at Walgreens down on Capitol Street. And that was the place where the Dutchmen came every afternoon and on the weekends.
It was at a birthday party for another Dutchman at the rotisserie. And there were a lot of us at a long table, and he sat directly across from me.
They knew how to treat a lady. Opened the car doors for her. Pulled out the chair for you. They just were very nice.
I didn't know that Leo was one of them. He came in and one day he came by and he said he had seen me there a few days before then, and he just wondered if he could come to see me.
And he was entertaining everybody around and just seemed to be a very interesting type guy, you know.
I had a girlfriend and she was dating the Dutch flyers, but she wouldn't go unless I went with her. And I think the one that she was dating at that time got tired of me tagging along all the time. So he brought me a date, and it turned out to be Johnny Veenstra.
We started going out with him, and I thought he was the best thing since sliced bread, or however you want to make a phrase of it. But yeah, he was a wonderful person. I just loved him dearly.
I wasn't ready to get married. Said, you know, after the war, we still feel this way, you know. We've got more. You're older, and I'm older too, because he wasn't but 21.
I said, unless we are married, and then we can, you know, live together. So he went and got licensed. I didn't know at that time that he was supposed to have a permit from the government to be married.
We decided we wanted to get married, but you had to get permission from the officer that took care of that.
We just assumed we would get married. And Jan was, after the war, he was planning to come back over here but couldn't get leave. So I packed my wedding dress and my trousseau and went over there.
A friend of his and my girlfriend, they went with us, and we got married there in Brandon.
So we got married without permission. this is a true story.
His family had planned all the wedding, and it was in a big cathedral-type church, you know, big Catholic church. Big dinner afterwards and reception.
It was just quite an experience and a big part of my life, and it still is a big part of my life because I've got two wonderful sons. They came from that, and I wouldn't change a thing about it.
He said to me, I knew he looked very sad when he walked in and pale, and I thought, well, what's wrong? And he said, I've just got some bad news. And I said, well, what is it? I can understand it, you know, if you just tell me what's happened. And he said, I have to leave and go back to the base. I can't live here anymore. And I said, why? And he said, because they think that I'm married in Java. And of course that tore my heart out, you know, and so what do? I had knelt down in front of him in a chair, so I just wanted to slap him, you know, I did at that time. I was so hurt over it. And I thought, this can't be the end, but it was, and
But I can say this, there's nothing like your first love. And I think most people that have had that first love, they know when they have, it's different.
So I thought I wouldn't be able to live after that. What could I do? I married a person that I just loved so much that I didn't think that I could stand to be without him. So sure enough, at that moment, he had to give up his clothes and leave. He had no moment. They wouldn't give him a minute to stay there any longer.
But I found out early on, God gave us a heart that's big enough for all the people he sends our way. There's a room for him in our hearts.
I got a telegram from the government saying that Leo his plane had been shot down and that there were no survivors. Most love I'd ever had in my life, and I guess that's why it meant so much to me, you know. When I met him, and he was so kind and good and respectful, and so I was so thankful that I had the chance to enjoy that lifestyle, even if it was just a short one.
He was sitting in the back seat and I'm sitting up front. He leaned over, put his arms around me and hugged me and whispered in my ear, I'll always love you. And he gave me a kiss. That was my last time to see him.
Of course, our history with warfare didn't end with World War II. Shortly after it was over, we found ourselves embroiled in the Korean War. Then after that, Vietnam. This room and the room immediately behind it detail the strategies, the landscapes, and the soldiers that charted the course of those wars. These days, warfare has made extensive use of modern technology, all with the hopes of saving the lives of both civilians and those on the battlefronts. The museum ends up with a look at how the face of warfare continues to change as our troops deal with new threats and new battle techniques. And that brings us to the end of the museum. There is so much to see and do here, and the entry is free to the public, so it's worth the time to swing off Highway 49 if you're ever traveling in the area and see how the museum pays tribute to our nation's protectors. Hey, regrettably, that's all the time we have for this week's show. If you got a question about anything you've seen, contact us at mpbonline.org/Mississippi Roads. or join our Facebook page. Till next time, I'm Walt Grayson. I'll be seeing you on Mississippi Roads.
Mississippi Roads is made possible in part by the generous support of viewers like you. Thank you.